All right, let's go on. So the next technique, I promised a technique for making major decisions as well. So this is a technique that you use to make major decisions. It's for more serious decisions, ones that you want to make sure to get as perfect as possible. So this is not simply that you want to minimize errors. This is where you want to really maximize success, where really every hour of time that you spend right now will be worth more than 10 hours of time going forward, or every minute will be worth 10 minutes going forward or whatnot. So basically a 10x investment into where these are serious decisions. So this technique takes quite some time. So it might take an hour or more if you're doing it by yourself. And if you're doing it with a team, it might take, team members might have anywhere from half an hour to 2 hours of prep for this, and then a 2-hour meeting, at least a 2-hour meeting, maybe a half day, depends on how serious the decision is. So it can be an hour long if the decision is serious but not complex. If it's more on the complex side, then it can take, of course, more time. So there are 8 steps in making the best decisions technique. Identify the need for decision-making process, gather information from diverse perspectives, set specific and clear goals for the decision, develop clear decision-making criteria for the decision, then generate viable options for the decision, evaluate the options and pick the best of the bunch, implement the option that you chose, and evaluate the implementation, and then revise as needed. So these are the steps you want to follow for making the best decisions. Let's go for the first step, identifying the need for decision-making process. Now, why do I talk about this? Isn't this obvious? Well, it seems like it's obvious, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not clear that there's a need to make a decision. I, in the beginning, talked about Polaroid, which failed to make a decision to invest into digital. And then as a result, that was the major cause of its bankruptcy, strategic failure to make that strategic decision. For individual career, this applies to projects, this applies to careers. It can be as such, failing to make a decision to leave a company that's not looking good, that's looking like it's going down. Right now, I just helped one of my coaching clients, the COO of a dining restaurant, not right now, about 3 months ago. So 3 months ago, helped her transition from her role as the COO of a chain of more than 20 Midwestern restaurants to a different job in the grocery industry, a regional manager of a major grocery store. And it was not an easy decision, but it was the right decision because the restaurant industry is not going to do well in this economy. So that's kind of a decision. Or another opportunity might be in the auditing process, where a number of people would not pay sufficient attention to the need for internal audits when they really should. And this is and then serious problems are discovered by external auditors. So you want to identify the need for decision-making process, especially when there is no explicit problem involved, or when our instincts make it uncomfortable for us to accept the need for a tough decision, like leaving a job where you're otherwise comfortable because the industry is going downhill. That's definitely not an easy decision. Or when a project that you're working on is clearly, and maybe even leading, is clearly going in the wrong direction. Very many people deny reality, like those CEOs who are fired. Of course, project managers run into this sort of problem all the time. Or when you are doing an internal audit and you see that the problem is in the people, not simply the process, and it's hard to name them. So you want to recognize the need for a decision before it becomes an emergency. This is critical. This is a really important step. You want to make sure to acknowledge and recognize the need for a decision before it becomes an emergency. It's so easy to let things go until it becomes an emergency that you really don't want to be in that position. Don't put yourself in that position. Next. Gather info from a variety of diverse perspectives. You want to especially look for people who disagree with you. So place higher value on informed opinions with which you don't share that conclusion. So people who are, I think Tatiana was mentioning that it's hard to, one of the challenges for her organization is where people on other teams are maybe keeping too many resources for themselves, not cooperating enough. You want to get information from other teams if it's a collaborative project, even though it might be very tempting to gather only information from your team. That's because it's going to cause you a problem down the road if you don't do that. Or people with personalities different from you. So for example, if you tend to be pessimistic, if you tend to see the future as more full of threats, you'll also want to gather information from people who are optimistic, who see the future as full of opportunities and possibilities. Next, such perspectives you want to realize are going to help you realize your own blind spots. Everyone has them. There's no one who's immune from cognitive biases. I know that for myself. I tend to, for example, I tend to be very optimistic, and I tend to fall into overconfidence bias and planning fallacy. Those are frequent problems for me, so I know I need to watch out for that. Then, set specific and clear goals. It's surprising how often a project goes on because people feel like it's a good idea to do a project or a client demanded it, and then you just jump into the project without setting specific and clear goals. With a client, it can be really disastrous because if the client has different goals and expectations than you do, that's really not good. That is really harmful. And it can be an internal client or an external client. It's going to be really bad if you have different goals, different expectations. You want to get on the same page with your client, whoever it is. And even for your own project, you want to make sure to set specific and clear goals so that you don't invest into the wrong things. So have that clear vision of a desired outcome, and particularly recognize when a seemingly one-time decision for a specific outcome is there's actually a root cause. There's a systemic root cause that you need to address. So here your clear vision shouldn't be simply addressing the one-time decision. So for example, if you are in a leadership position and you see that some people are not performing well, then you want to get them a coach, for example. And that might be a specific and clear goal, but it might be a result of your underlying systems and processes. So you want to look at that, and you want to make addressing these root problems part of your desired outcome. Next, develop clear decision-making criteria. So whatever decision you're going through, you want to develop clear criteria for the decision. And you'll use these to weigh the options. Don't develop the options first. And rank each decision-making criteria on a scale of 1 to 10. I'll show you what I mean through this app. So this is an app that's specifically made for this technique, for making the right call on significant decisions. And you want to list the attributes. So these are the same thing as the criteria. So for example, you can have, let's say, just for simplicity's sake, you're making an important hire, and that's your key decision. So you want to list attributes like, let's say, salary demand, salary required. And then another one might be something like experience. Another one might be cultural fit into your organizational team culture. Another one might be technical skills. So those are going to be the attributes. And then you want to give each a weight. So salary requirements, let's say that, so I was just finished a strategic workshop for a startup that's major unicorn startup, and it's really good with cash up actually in this situation. So their salary requirements they're fine with it. So you don't want to give that a high ranking. 1 is for ranking that's low, 10 is for ranking that's high. So salary requirements, they would not worry about the salary requirements too much. Also, they wouldn't necessarily tell the person they're hiring that, but that's not a worry. So their salary requirements are free. they're really high, they really want to mature their team, to mature their executive team. So this is a major focus. Their experience would be a 9. The cultural fit would be, well, important, but not too critical. So something like a 6, because they do want to bring in people who are mature. So people who might not be, so even maybe a 5. So people who might not be the best cultural fit, but they want to actually change the team. And their technical skills, that might be something like, that's important, but not as important as experience, because they're really focusing on maturity, decision-making skills, so less technical skills. So that would be the attributes. And so you're weighing these. By the way, if you have any questions while I'm going through this, I'm happy to answer questions. So don't feel shy. I'm getting into the technicalities of things. So you get the weights. Then the next step is to list the attributes. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll go back to sharing in a bit. So that's the criteria. Then you want to generate viable options. Generate sufficient viable options. It's very tempting to settle for the first available alternative, and especially in startups, Mike, as you probably know, it's very tempting to go quickly and break things. But this, for major decisions, like hiring an important team member, that is a bad idea. If you want to make the best decision, you want to generate at least 5 appealing options. And then the 6th step is evaluate the options and pick the best of the bunch, where you rank each option on each of the criteria that you chose, multiply the ranks you assigned by the weight you assign to each criterion. I'll go through it in the app. Get a numerical score. You want to be aware of going with your initial preferences, especially looking for that initial choice in the harshest light possible. So what does that mean exactly? So we'll have options. We'll have 5 options. We'll say there's Ali, there's Sam, there's Ella, Sally, and Rob. So those are going to be the options. So listing out the options. Next, we'll rank the attributes for each option. So meaning, how good are they in each option? So Ali, let's say she is highly experienced, so she has high salary requirements, and therefore her salary requirements are 10, so really high salary requirements. Her experience is also high, so we'll rank that, not quite the best, but we'll rank that as 9. Because she's so experienced, she's not a good fit for this startup, so she's going to be at a 3. Her technical skills are going to be, because she's quite experienced, she's really good, let's say they're an 8. Sam is going to be low salary requirements because he is not as experienced. So he's going to be a 5 at experience. He's worked in startups a lot, so he would be a terrific cultural fit. Let's even give him a 10. And he has really good technical skills. Ella would be somewhere in the middle. So her experience would be, say, 8. Cultural fit would be a 5. Technical skills would be an 8. And Sally, let's give her some numbers, just for funsies. And Rob would be, let's say, and technical skills 9. Okay, so this is how you would rank the options. This is the process by which you rank the options. So you got the salary requirements, you got their weights, so you know what they are, you rank them on each of the criteria, and then you multiply them out. Very simple, very clear, just multiply them out. That's all. So then you want to check whether it fits your intuitions, whether would you be surprised, then you can make sure to tweak these numbers, but focus very carefully on making sure to look at your initial preference in a harsh light. So we didn't have an initial preference, but we can tweak some of the numbers. We can say, well, we know that Sally is very experienced. Maybe we're overrating her technical skills. So it wouldn't be much of a change if we did that. So that's good to know. So we're evaluating her technical skills. So she's significantly above everybody else in this chart. Probably, even if she had less experience, she would still be above everybody else. And even if her salary requirements were less, she would still be above everybody else. So we should probably, in this case, go with Ali, though, for the hire, even though we might have preferred somebody else initially, like Ella or Sally. So that's the process by which you go through. And the app is going to be right there in the chat for you to check out, so to use as part of this process. Next, you want to implement the option that you chose. That's the next step. So implementing the option that you chose. And this involves two steps. One that's going to be a callback to the previous question, imagining the decision completely failed. This is a much more complex version of this than what are all the ways this can fail. And imagine the decision absolutely succeeded. So imagine the decision completely failed. This is a critical step. You want to not simply say what are all the ways that it could fail, which is what number 4, question 4 in the quick decision-making technique was about. This is a much more thorough approach. You want to imagine the decision completely failed because you want to give yourself permission to go through all the ways that it could fail. So imagine that hiring Ali completely failed. What are all the reasons for why it failed? And maybe she didn't have sufficient support in the organization internally because she had a bad cultural fit, but you're bringing her in partially because she has a bad cultural fit, because you want to mature the team, develop the organization. It's a late stage startup. It's a couple of years away from IPO, and it's doing pretty well, but it needs a team that's going to take it to the next level, the public level. So you want to get a different culture. So you need to give her much more support than you would otherwise. Or maybe she failed because her experience was not aligned with what you needed. Then you want to make sure to do a more in-depth research into her experience, make sure that her experience is actually what you're looking for. And consider how you might solve these problems, like the 2 ways I described. Integrate the solutions into your implementation plan. And then imagine the decision absolutely succeeded. So imagine that Ali was such a wonderful fit that she was really great, and let's say you're hiring her for the COO position, that she in 10 years would then become the CEO. So that's, or even in 5 years, she would become the CEO. So let's say that's a very successful hire for a COO. What are all the reasons for success? So perhaps she quickly made inroads into the company culture, developed good social networks, developed a good sense of the culture, and was able to push it toward the culture that was more of a fit for a public company. And consider how you can bring these reasons into actual life and integrate what you learned into your implementation plan. So for example, you can assign her a mentor who would be mentoring her. You can make sure to introduce her into informal networks, which are so incredibly important in each organization. These cliquish like informal networks, which are how organizations function effectively internally. So all of these are sorts of things that you can integrate into your implementation plan. And finally, evaluate the implementation and revise as needed. Evaluation means metrics. So measure, measure, measure. What are clear metrics of successful implementation? So maybe you can do something like give Ali a 360-degree evaluation once a month for the first 6 months. And your goal would be for her scores on the 360 evaluation to get at least 5% higher each month. So that could be something that you have a specific goal for. and that would be your metric of successful implementation, as well as, so yes, that's a very clear and specific metric. And check in regularly to ensure you're meeting or exceeding your success metrics, which means checking in every month in this case. If not, you want to revise the implementation as needed. So if you see that, let's say, Ali is getting lower scores from a specific, let's say, a specific subset of her subordinates, her direct reports, then they're not improving, then that's something that you want to address. And you might find that the original decision might need to be revised. This is just being honest. Ali might not work out. It might be too much of a disparity between the cultural fit or something like that, or personality issues. So that might need to be revised. Don't be too attached to this original decision. All right, so that's the 8-step technique for making the best decisions. This is for serious decisions, major decisions. You really don't want to screw up. You want to get as right as possible. I'll be happy to take questions at this stage. Any questions about this technique? Clarifications, questions?
I was just wondering if you maybe be able to share some life examples where this technique worked or success stories.
I just gave an example where hiring people, that's a very common technique. When you want to launch a major product and you're evaluating what product to launch, that's a technique that I've used successfully with companies on a consulting project. When you're choosing a new database to implement or a new major software, this is a very good technique to use. So for example, if you go here, let's see, hold on. This can be names of software. So let's say, Salesforce, whatever, CRM, whatever, CRM-B, whatever you're choosing, CRM-C, and other CRMs. And then you look at financial requirements, ease of use, integration with other software, technical requirements, something like this. And then you rank them. You see the weights. The weights depend on what is important to you. So Salesforce will generally be the most expensive thing, but you're not looking at the rankings first. You're looking at the criteria. How important are the financial requirements for you? If you're really tight for money, then there will be a 10. So ease of use, that might be something like you can be a company, if you're a software company and you know that all of your people are quite good with software, it might not be very important. Integration into other platforms might be somewhat important. And then technical requirements, various sorts, that would be some demands on your programming that might not be very important. And then you just go through and rank Salesforce and so on, all of these CRMs. So that would be a way to make a choice on a major software vendor, for example. Does that clarify things?
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Tasha. Thank you for the question. Other folks, other questions? Okay, Martin asked for bullet notes for number 3 again, happy to. So you want to set, again, specific and clear goals, painting that vision of desired outcome, and again, recognize when a seemingly one-time decision is a symptom of underlying issues with your systems and processes, and make addressing them part of the desired outcome. So if you're seeing that your team is somehow not very together, your executive team or current team, is not prepared for some certain shifts, that means that it's not, and there's one person in particular who's particularly bad, and you want to figure out what to do about this person. Well, you might need to address a root cause, root systems. Or, for example, if you're seeing that, I think somebody mentioned that until 3 years ago, their organization had no good project management processes. And as a result of that, a number of projects went disastrously badly. Therefore, they addressed the root cause of these problems, not simply a one-off with a single project, but implementing an effective project management process. So that would be ways you address root causes. You're welcome, Martin. Other folks? Questions about this technique? All right, sounds like there are no immediate questions. So this is a more complex technique. I will give you 5 minutes to write about where and how this might be useful to you and to your company, to your team, and then which of these steps, if more than one, please talk about more than one, might be the most useful to you. So take 5 minutes to write about these topics by yourself on your computer or on a pen and paper, whatever you prefer, before we go into breakout groups. So take those 5 minutes to write about that. And if any questions come up in the meantime, of course, while you're writing about these things, I'm happy to answer. So I'll be right here. Go ahead. So please take 5 minutes to write, and then we'll break into breakout groups. Another 2 minutes to write before going into breakout groups. All right, folks, time for breakout groups. So again, the same things, discuss where and how this might be useful to you. You can talk about your team, yourself, your career, your organization, whatever, and which of these points, which of these steps might be most useful, one or more of these steps. So that's what you talk about in the breakout groups. And again, because this is a more complex topic, I'll give you 15 minutes instead of the usual 10. Alpan and Stephanie, let me know if you're having trouble joining the breakout rooms. Still waiting for a few more people from the breakout rooms. I have 10 people. I think we're supposed to have 16 or 17. Okay, I think we're all here. Great, welcome back everyone. All right, I'd like to hear about your experience discussing this methodology, what you thought, how you thought it might be useful to you individually or as part of a team, to your organization, and also which of these steps, if one or more, do you think might be most helpful to you? So please go ahead, unmute yourself, or in the chat if for some reason you can't unmute yourself, and share your thoughts.
Okay, I'll go first.
Mike.
So we like a very simple, just some very simple changes to the way that we process the tickets that come into a queue for either bug fixes or new feature requests, and our world would benefit from just a touch more maturity. Right now, we evaluate the level of effort, whether it's high or low, the impact. Like, does it? If we do this, will it cover 80% of our customer base? Does it align with our strategic vision for the product? And we also include feedback from the field, which is like the customer voice.
Mm-hmm.
But when we evaluate those factors, it's very subjective, and it's based on the opinion of a person that's kind of evaluating the queue. So I think just adding a touch of rigor to that process for prioritization would help us make some better decisions.
Excellent, and that's definitely helpful for startups to add some rigor. That is a very important step and a step toward maturity. Great, thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Would any of these specific steps be most helpful, or is it generally a question of rigor that all of the steps would provide? I was curious, Mike.
So I kind of focused in on number 6 and 7.
Okay.
So the evaluation phase, because really it's about setting priority of what to do, and then the outcome of that is either choose not to do it, we do it, maybe we'll do it, it goes into a backlog. Right? Those are really the three things that can happen.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Great. Other folks?
I'm going to share some of the things we discussed also in our group. I thought one of the interesting, I didn't even think about it, that those steps can be used not just for evaluation of software or a vendor, as we talked, but within software itself. So like, for example, license management program was mentioned. And I thought it was an interesting point. Some other project that it could be applicable over, I thought, could be, we discussed recently the restructuring of department, and that's a decision maker. More specific, the bank has multiple branches around the country, and there's always discussions about whether to keep it open or close it. I really liked on the steps, the evaluation options and way to some of the challenges that come immediately to my head, that it might be time consuming, and together with number 2, you might create your own, if you would, table or system, and by the time you share with everybody, it's going to look different depending on the input received. It seems to be a pretty straightforward process for something like recruiting. But for the bigger one, I think it will require more time.
Yeah, it depends. So the more important the decision, the more time it should require, because it's the cost of making the wrong decision and the benefits of making the right decision. Both the rewards and the risks are higher. So the more important decision, if you're deciding to keep open or close a branch, that is a really important decision. So that's where you want to look at a variety of criteria. So looking at that app, what kind of criteria do you want to look at? How do you rank each one? And then you can customize a system that would be applicable. You go through it once, you can apply it to future branches because the criteria presumably aren't really going to change. So
something like this, if it keeps stable throughout a period of time, it could be helpful for multiple of those decisions.
Exactly. Great. Yeah. And like I said, you have a link to the app and you can, of course, adapt it to your needs, however it would be helpful. And
yeah, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Luciana. Other folks?
I guess I'll jump in here a little bit. I mean, I work for an accounting firm, so I mean, the firm's fairly well established. I mean, we've been around a while, pretty big, very specific processes and controls. If we were to, I mean, in our breakout group was talking about, if we were to add a new service line or something like that from a client service offering, I mean, there's a fairly prescribed process for that internally. However, I do feel like there would be a benefit if, on the initial proposal process for getting kind of this off the ground. If you were to make a proposal to a partner or prepare a partner for their proposal to, a governing board or an industry group board or something like that, they would have to essentially allocate funds to launching something. Going through this thought logic process, giving weight, essentially it's a weighted average.
Yes.
You're allocating a weighted average to attribute testing as a type deal. So it would basically just put like another arrow in the quiver of how you sliced and diced and analyzed the situation from a discussion point to let them know that giving the decision makers comfort in in a really thoughtful analysis that was done. So from that perspective, I don't think that this one tool is an end all be all, but I think it's part of a package of tools available for making larger decisions when you have not as much information as you would like.
Right. Excellent. Great. Yes. So the part that you're talking about, kind of the weighted average, that would be steps 4, 5, and 6. And so using those, it sounds like for an initial proposal, evaluating it would be helpful in terms of enriching the decision-making process, making it more specific and accurate. And that's what you want to do for a major decision. You want to make it as accurate as possible, or as accurate as it would be reasonable given your time limitations.
I think additionally to it, depending on how diverse of a skill set and or experience the initial team had, if you were to lay out the attributes that you used, in the presentation, I could see it allowing for much more efficient, timely feedback, because those you're proposing to would have a tangible way to say, add this attribute. We feel that this is important. Come back, redo the analysis, see how that impacts the other parts of it, and then let's reconvene and kind of pick up from there instead of starting over. Whereas I think we've all experienced, you have a project and it's just a binary yes or no. And when it's a no, it's that 6 month to 36 month turnaround of being able to repropose on that project again, because you have to have enough time go by where people kind of forget about it, as opposed to, yeah, we're pretty close, but maybe we need to look at these attributes. And so I think it would be, this process would also make that kill cycle that often happens with projects. You have that initial project team proposing on it, whether it's in a startup. I think one of the guys was talking about, feature adds to software, right? A lot of times I see that because I do testing on that from a change management perspective, right? And so we'll see changes that start and stop, when we're doing attribute testing on it. and there's a lot of money wasted in those scenarios because you're duplicating, triplicating work, right? Because you're starting and stopping and starting and stopping. Whereas if this was used, I could see where leadership would say, look at these attributes, put them through the ringer, see what that comes back with, and it would allow for a more efficient cycle in total for a project, as opposed to that start stop that typically happens.
Oh, that's excellent. I'm really glad that you brought that up. That's we don't work internally in organizations, so I work externally. They bring me in to do a decision-making process on a major thing. So I haven't had the experience of the cycle, kind of having the kill project cycle, stop, and evaluating that as, hey, we can evaluate a specific aspect of the attribute and come back. So that's not part of my experience, but I'm very glad that it can be useful for you and other folks, presumably in that way, who are more internal consultants and who are looking at the organization and seeing these projects internally. So thank you for sharing that. That's an innovative use of it, and I'm really glad that you are creatively applying it to an application that I didn't really think about previously.
Yeah. Well, and I'm external as well. So I work for an external accounting firm. So we're brought in just like you are, right? I mean, we have different skill sets. We're getting hired for different things. But when I go in and I'm doing the testing on things like this, whether it's change management, logical security, and they're doing rollouts and stuff like that, or control environment related, process environment related items, you read these change tickets, right? And then you'll read ones that'll they'll do the initial kind of proposal steps, right? And then that'll stop in like 2016. And then but it was completed during the current testing window. And so that entire ticket gets pulled, right? All the merge tickets, all the different threads, all that kind of stuff. And you read through it and you're like, well, what happened? Well, it starts happening enough times, you start realizing, oh, what's happening is that these things just die on the vine, and then somebody else champions them, and then it gets a little bit better, and then someone else champions them. And so using that, being able to fill those gaps with this process, I could see being beneficial. So I'm kind of in the same boat you are. I have experience not from having done it, but having essentially tested where this process would be used in an entity and seeing patterns along the way.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a really valuable insight. So thank you, Brian. I really appreciate that. Great. All right. So at this point, I'd like you to go on to the poll. So you should all have the poll in front of you. And I'd like you to answer, how helpful might it be to use this technique for making major decisions? So clearly, Brian would find it helpful in that area, and Mike and others would find parts of it helpful. So how helpful would you find it? Okay, we have 7 out of 11 voted, and Jennifer voted online. So please, the rest of you, if you haven't voted yet, I'll give you 5 more seconds to vote. So 5 more seconds. Okay, so find approximately the same balance. 2/3 would find moderately helpful, and 1/3 would find it very helpful. So again, when you're finding moderately helpful, this is a technique that's useful for parsing. So taking parts out, applying it to your process, integrating it. So like we've heard just now, for those who find very helpful, so think about, for those who find moderately helpful, what aspects of it you can integrate and how. For those who would find very helpful, definitely try to take most of the technique, if not all of it, and integrate it in a short-term manner. All right. This is a good time for a 10-minute break. So it's right now 10:20. Come back at 10:30. We're going to start in a minute. All right, it's time to start. It's time to start. Let's do it. So the next technique I want to talk about is an elaboration on steps 7 and 8, when you want to make sure that you not only make the right decision, but implement the project in the best way possible. This will help you avoid problems. And let me go through this because we're in question 6. So it's called the failure proofing technique, to address problems and maximize success in implementing projects. And again, it has 8 steps. First, gather relevant stakeholders for the decision-making process. Depending on the decision, of course, there are going to be different stakeholders. You want 6 to 10 people, no more than 10 people. Gather leaders with the most expertise. That's kind of the good way of thinking about it. People who have a strategic vision and who have expertise. So people who, you don't need to have the top leader of the organization, but you want to have people who have decision-making authority and with the power to make and implement decision, and also who have expertise in evaluating the situation. So not just hire up personnel. If you want to, obviously, if you're making a software decision, you want people with software expertise in the room. You don't want simply executives, So executives who don't have as much relevant expertise. Consider using an independent facilitator from elsewhere in the organization or from ISACA, your peer members, something like that. Then explain the process, which we'll go through. Explain this process, describe it, make sure everyone gets on the same page. Then what you want to do is, after you have your initial project plan, so you have your initial plan, that's the basic idea, you have your initial implementation plan, but then you want to develop your next best alternative. So what would you do if you didn't do your initial implementation plan, your initial vision? What are your next best alternatives to implementing the decision? Remember, this is after the decision has been made. So you're looking at how to implement it effectively. So your next best alternatives to implementing the decision. What are they? Have each participant write down one next best alternative anonymously. It's really important to write this anonymously, which is why you want an independent facilitator. So have them write down anonymously. If you're doing it virtually, it's easy to do it using Google surveys or something like that. So we're doing a lot of virtual stuff these days. But of course, you can do it on paper if you're doing something in person, hopefully it's an outdoor space. Anonymity is really important here. It's really important that unpopular ideas or politically problematic ones can be avoided. I had a project where somebody wrote down that a new product launch would be, we shouldn't launch the product in this way because the product manager, the one who's in charge of it, hates the guts of the marketing manager, and that was something that's obviously unpopular political opinion that was important to be expressed because we needed to work through this issue. Apparently, that was a major conflict in the organization and had to be addressed before it could be resolved. So the facilitator gathers and reads everyone's NDAs, not necessarily out loud, but for himself, to see if there are any repeats. You don't want to have too many repeats. You want to hold a vote on selecting the top two and facilitate the discussion, and take an anonymous vote on whether one of the NDAs is preferable to the original option. And if not, you can see if you can integrate elements from the NDA into the original plan. Then brainstorm reasons for failure. So think about all the reasons why it might fail. First of all, permitting yourself to do so by imagining that the decision, project, or process, whatever you're implementing, this applies to decisions, projects, and processes. And by the way, not simply implementation, but reevaluation of current ones. A lot of people are doing that in the terms of COVID right now. I think I mentioned that I was doing a strategic retreat for a major startup that was on Tuesday. And so they're doing a really major reevaluation of their strategy. So it's not simply implementing a project or process. They're doing a reevaluation of their product strategy. How are they, and it's a software startup. So how are they running their product? What's their vision for a product? And ends up being a pretty fundamental revisioning of the filters that they use for product development, from delighting the user to getting the job done, and really a different approach, different mentality, which would involve not simply different sales and marketing, but different resource implementation, pulling back from innovation and focusing more on fundamentals, which is really quite a bit more important in terms of COVID, where people are really not looking for as much fancy stuff as doing the fundamentals in the most effective way possible, ease of use, stuff like that. Brainstorm reasons why the project that you're implementing might have failed. Each participant writes at least 3 plausible reasons for failure. So 3 plausible reasons. The facilitator then gathers everyone's statements, highlighting key themes, and focus on reasons that would not be typically brought up, like what I mentioned before, while ensuring anonymity. So, for something that we've talked about, a reason why a certain software implementation might fail is that the executives brought it in without consulting the people who are going to be implementing it, the software people, IT auditing people. So the software might be a good fit, but it might fail because it doesn't have buy-in and investment from the people who would be implementing and using it. That's very frequent, unfortunately. Then decide on the most likely problems. So what are the most likely problems, the ones you brought up? Combine their probability and impact, especially those ones that are seen as dangerous to careers, rude, politically impolite. Check for potential cognitive biases using the assessment and dangerous judgment errors in the workplace, and assess anonymously the likelihood of and impact of each reason for failure, using percentages if possible. It's likely to fail for this reason. This is 70% likelihood or 20% likelihood. Pay special attention to the ones that are most harmful, most impactful. And harmful is a combination of impact, how bad it will be, and probability. So COVID-19, low probability, high impact, that's bad. Then brainstorm ways to fix the problems. So that's the payoff. You want to not simply brainstorm problems, but then how do you fix the problems? Decide on the failures that seem the most relevant. So the startup, for example, saw a major failure as it's focusing on shiny new features that are innovative and cool in sentiment analysis, AI, machine learning stuff, but it's not providing clear ROI with metrics of its success. And right now, CFOs who are making much more decisions and going through all of their spending and really reevaluating spending would be not impressed by shiny features as would their end users. They would be impressed by ROI, metrics of success. And so brainstorms ways of solving them. So they're shifting resources in their product development process to really looking at metrics of success and quite a bit away from innovation and shiny features. Address mental blind spots, but ideally using the assessment. Then brainstorm reasons for success and ways of bringing that about. So that's kind of the opposite. You address failure, now you maximize success. Imagine that it succeeded spectacularly. That's whatever you're doing, software implementation, audit process, improving the audit processing, whatever you're evaluating, whatever you're doing. Then brainstorm ways that you can achieve this outcome. So imagine it succeeded. How can you get this outcome to success? Then write plausible reasons for success. The facilitator, again, gathering reasons, highlights key themes, leading the discussion, and brainstorming ways of maximizing each reason for success. This is exactly the same steps that you would do for failure. And then revise the plan. So you want to revise the overall plan based on the strategic exercise, and if needed, of course, the exercise can be repeated. So going back to the beginning, if it seems like there are lots of failure points and that you really want to do another, go back to the drawing board and do some serious revisions of the plan. If you just want to address one or two attributes, as was discussed for the previous one, this is not something to go back to the drawing board. But if you want to do more fundamental revision. All right, I'll be happy to take questions on this method, any clarifications that you might be looking for. All right, so then if there are no questions, since this is less complicated than the previous one, I'll just give you 2 minutes to write about this, and then we'll have a 10-minute discussion in breakout groups. So take 2 minutes, please, to write about how you might use this in your organization, in your own work, in your team. And that's the first thing that you'll want to write about. And then the second, which of the steps seem like they would be most helpful to you. So please take 2 minutes to write about that, and then we'll go into breakout groups. All right, everyone. I was asked to write the questions in the chat window, so I just wrote them in the chat window. This will be transitioning now to the group discussion of these questions. Again, first one, where can you use this technique most effectively for yourself, your team, your organization, your career? So as applied to you from your perspective. And which of the steps of the technique might be most helpful to you? All right, going into breakout rooms. 10 minutes. Jennifer, let me know if you're having trouble joining a breakout room. Thank you, everyone. Yes, I am muted. Appreciate it, Tatiana and Brian. Yes, so again, the questions were where can you use this technique most effectively for yourself, your team, your organization, and which of the steps might be most helpful to you, one or more. So please unmute yourself and share your perspective.
This is Aparna. We were trying to discuss in our break room that, looks like some of these steps may be a repeat in the process. And the second thing we thought that the whole process of decision making sometimes, if it's a small project like agile project, you don't have time to do all these steps.
Yes, yeah, this is for major, for
multi-year or multi-division or whatever.
Or an expensive thing that's a one-time thing.
Then you have it's what do the steps, you know what I'm saying? So that's what we discussed a little bit,
Yeah, this is for major projects, major processes, major decisions. So either long-term ones or ones that might be short-term but are important. A short-term or important one might be which supplier you bring in for a certain activity, or which key hire you make, or something like that. And of course, long-term ones are long-term ones, major projects. So or let's say for a bank, which bank branch do you close? And not which one, but after you close it, how do you close it effectively, and so on. So all of these project management steps, addressing that. Thank you, Alpana. Other folks, your thoughts on this technique and the steps? Okay, let's go on to do the poll then. So please look at the poll. How helpful might it be for some or all on your team to use this technique for major projects? Please go ahead and vote. We have just under 50% of the people voting. Please go ahead, vote. Jennifer voted B, thank you. With 10 out of 13 people voted, I'll give the last folks who want to vote 5 more seconds. Okay, so around, well, with Jennifer voting B, it should be about 75% would find it moderately helpful and 25%. So so everyone will find helpful. It would either be moderately helpful for 3/4 of you, for 1/4 what you would find very helpful. So if you're finding it moderately helpful, think about which aspects of it you find most helpful and strive to integrate those aspects into your project management work, into your activities. And for those of you who find it very helpful, of course, integrate as much of it pretty quickly as you can, because this is definitely going to be helpful for you, given that you're finding it helpful. Okay. All right. So let's go on to the next technique. And again, I described this technique pretty quickly, so we had about 35 minutes, so now we're not going to take a break right now. I'm going to go into the next technique. The next technique is a strategic planning technique. So how do you make effective strategic plans? Our typical strategic planning process is unfortunately really not helpful, as so many companies are finding out right now in the context of COVID, when so many companies are actually still sticking to their strategic plans when what they should be doing is pivoting in a very serious way toward a different strategic plan. The problem with typical strategic plans is that they're made in a set, clear way. Kind of, this is our strategic plan for the next 5 years, and they don't account for the likelihood, pretty high likelihood, of serious, significant disruptions. And that's why so many plans get left in the third bottom desk drawer in a dusty three-ring binder because they're no longer applicable. The more time goes on, the more you deviate away from that plan because reality doesn't stick to the plan. So your plan doesn't survive contact with the enemy. It's vulnerable to planning fallacy, to overconfidence bias, normalcy bias. A lot of these cognitive biases that have to do with planning, they have to especially apply at strategic planning levels because we have less information. When we're looking at a project plan, we have more information about what's going on in the project, generally speaking. But when we're looking at a strategic plan, that has to do with the role of the division, business unit within a broader, not simply the company, but the external environment or the company itself, something like that. And you can predict the external environment much less than you can predict internally what's happening with the company and with a specific project. So there's a much more effective technique called Defend Your Future. And here are the 8 steps of the Defend Your Future technique. We'll go through them one by one. You decide on the scope and the goals. So what area you're looking at, your business unit, your division, your team, perhaps your merger and acquisition strategy, perhaps your software acquisition, perhaps your auditing process strategy, the scope of which you're looking at. Then the timeline. Are you looking at the next 3 years? Are you looking at the next year? The strategic goals. So what goals do you actually want to reach? Look at the goals, have a clear vision of the strategy, of your strategy. What vision do you want to see for the future? The longer the timeline, the less accuracy you'll have. So this is just a basic premise. Yeah, we know that about more than 1 year out, we lose a lot of accuracy. So if you're going to be planning for more than 1 year out, which most strategic plans are, the longer you're doing the timeline for, the more resources you'll need to address uncertainty. So be prepared to reserve more resources. I mean, how many companies wish they had more resources to address the uncertainty with COVID, for example? Gather the stakeholders in the room. Here, it's a smaller amount than the previous techniques. I'd recommend 4 to 6 people, no more than 10, but really it's better to have less than 6 or less. Balance of expertise and authority. Consider recruiting, and just like previous techniques, you want not simply those with authority, but those with expertise in the matter at hand. And here it's especially valuable to have an independent facilitator who is familiar with the external dynamics that are going on and who can manage the process. Think about the anticipated future. This is the typical strategic plan. That's just what you go through the typical strategic plan. What your anticipated future look like? What would it look like without major changes? Again, this is what the typical strategic plan is like. Everything goes as you anticipate. How many resources would you require? So evaluate those resources, your strategic plan, your resources. Then think about unanticipated problems. So here you're thinking about whatever problems might arise. And here is where you're scanning the horizon for various disruptors like COVID, or things that you don't think about internally, like maybe disruptions in your internal organization due to the Me Too movement, or the protests, or all of these sorts of things. The things that you don't think about, maybe a key employee gets hit by a bus or something like that. Write out potential problems anonymously. So what might happen, again, for the same reasons that I discussed before, estimate the likelihood and the impact of each, so probability and the strength of each. And determine what are the most serious ones by multiplying the likelihood by the impact. Of COVID-19, as I mentioned before, low probability, high impact, and various other things. A key employee getting sick at a bad time is higher probability and high to moderate impact depending on the situation. Brainstorm solutions. How can you solve these problems? How can you address them in advance if possible? So looking at the horizon, looking at scanning the external environment to look for threats coming down the pipeline, as well as making a plan to address them if they do occur in advance. Business continuity plan right now. So many companies just had a typical business continuity plan when they went into COVID, just for a 1 to 2 week interruption. That's not a good fit, but they turn to their business continuity plans when they're dealing with COVID. That is a bad fit. That's like running a marathon in a sprint. COVID is a huge, major disruption, long-term rolling disruption, not a good fit for a typical business continuity plan. That's why so many companies should have made a much better business continuity plan, which includes the possibility for a major disruption, whether it's due to the pandemic or so many other things, but they aren't prepared for it. And they are suffering right now. Identify what resources you'll need to solve these problems. Time, money, social capital, networks of various sorts, strategic planning resources in advance, thinking about things in advance before they become a problem, maybe making a PR plan in advance in case it's a PR issue, maybe making an internal, anticipating that certain software is going to be an issue, anticipating that during an auditing process, sometime you'll find a hornet's nest. So how will you deal with a hornet's nest situation? What will you do then? Maybe you want some professional development on how to address interpersonal conflicts in the context of auditing. And there's definitely professional development on that, but you need to have that in advance of running into the hornet's nest, rather than once you run into the hornet's nest, it's a little bit too late. Update your strategic plan with this new information. Then unanticipated opportunities. So what unanticipated opportunities might come up that you can address? Write out these potential opportunities anonymously. So maybe, since we're talking about COVID, you can have a situation where you take certain steps to protect against COVID, you get yourself secure, but your competitors are stumbling. And then you can line yourself up to have a good situation by gaining market share in the context of competitors stumbling, which is what we did with the startup that I mentioned on Tuesday that was going through a strategic planning process. Estimate the likelihood and the impact of each probability. Determine the most promising opportunities. So for example, making key hires, or if there's a software development, if you're looking for software development of some sort, thinking about opportunities in that sphere. Brainstorm ideas about how to bring them about and seize them, identify the resources needed to seize them, and update your strategic plan with this new information. Then think about dangerous judgment errors. So again, check for relevant cognitive biases, use the assessment. If there's no opportunity, check for common biases, loss aversion, status quo bias, confirmation bias, attentional bias, overconfidence, optimism bias, pessimism bias, halo effect, and horns effect. We talked about all of these. So these are the ones you want to look out for, especially, but ideally you go for the whole assessment. Then think about unknown unknowns, also called black swans. You want to scan your environment for these sorts of potential major disruptors. COVID-19, many people are calling it a black swan, but it's not really a black swan. Many people, including Bill Gates and many other prominent people who are not quite as prominent as Bill Gates, were predicting the major pandemic, and a number of companies got pandemic insurance. Pandemic insurance is a way that they're ensuring that they are staying in a pretty good situation right now in the context of a pandemic, or at least they made better business continuity plans, which included the possibility for a major disruption to their supply lines, if they had supply lines in China, Asia, and elsewhere, for other sorts of things. They, of course, for shift to full remote for a long time. That's a very basic thing that should be a part of any serious business continuity plan. But the large majority of companies didn't have that as part of their business continuity plan. So for you and your key stakeholders, not only you, your key stakeholders might be disrupted as well. Your investors, your various vendors, software providers, they might be disrupted, and you need to address those sorts of problems. What will happen if your major key stakeholders are disrupted? How will you address their failures? Decide on the resources that you'll need to support this. So maybe take some time to investigate alternative providers of services and products, maybe localizing your supply chain or something like that. And add 40% to account for truly unpredictable events. So this is essentially things that you can predict. You will put certain resources into addressing them. And these are unknown unknowns. So if you, let's say, if you can now predict a pandemic, you will put aside certain resources to addressing it, getting pandemic insurance, making a better business continuity plan would be some examples. But then you want to, there are some things that you really won't be able to predict. You know, major solar flare that takes out the GPS and much of our electricity network. That is very hard to predict. So you want to put aside, this is an example of many other things that are just very much unknown unknowns. You want to put aside a cash cushion of 40%. Whatever you're spending on insurance right now on these sorts of things and protecting yourself from risks, have a cash cushion of 40% more to address various risks. And consider how to make plans more flexible and resilient. You know, there are a number of organizations right now that are doing really well in COVID because they had a cash cushion. You know, well, Berkshire Hathaway had 180 billion. I'm not suggesting you should have that much, but it had something like 180 billion squared away. And now it's using that to make investments and buy companies, buy stocks that are much cheaper than they should be. And so it's in a much better position than it would be otherwise, than many other companies are. By contrast, consider airlines, which were making money hand over fist for the last decade or so, from 2008, 2009 to COVID-19. But they gave it all away to shareholders and share buybacks, and now they're in deep, deep trouble. And you want to also consider how to make your plans more flexible, more resilient. Those are generally ways to protect yourself from unknown unknowns. Finally, communicate to the key stakeholders and take whatever next steps you decided. So reserve the resources needed and take the next steps. I'll be happy to take questions on this strategic planning technique. Doesn't appear that there are any questions. So we'll do the same. So this is more complex than the previous one, so it'll take about 5 minutes to write about this individually. And the questions are, as you write about them individually, where can you use this technique most effectively? For yourself, your team, your organization. This applies to your career as well as your work, whatever you're doing, whatever you want to be thinking about. Many folks use this technique to plan out their own career. Of course, this is a very wise approach to making sure that you defend your future of your career. And of course, your work in your organization, your individual work, your team's work, your organization as a whole, and which of these steps might be most helpful for you to think about and then address. So please take 5 minutes to write about this for yourself before we go into breakout groups. All right, folks, before we go into breakout groups, Alpana sent a question to me: how do you gather unanticipated problems and opportunities? What you would want to do, so again, this is part of just getting in a room with people who are stakeholders on the decision, key stakeholders, and that the steps involved were to make sure that everyone writes at least 3 of each. So I'm going to go back to gathering stakeholders, 4 to 6, no more than 10, balance of expertise and authority, and then anticipated future, then write out potential problems anonymously. So here you want 3 problems from each person. That's the goal, to have each person write out 3 problems, unanticipated problems. Okay, Alpan, I hope that answered your question. Okay, everyone. So time for breakout groups. We'll give, because this is a more complex exercise technique, we'll give 15 minutes to discuss it. Everyone go to breakout rooms. The same questions to discuss as before, as you wrote about. Folks who are remaining here, let me know if you're having challenges with joining a breakout room. Well, I'll assume that you have no challenges and that I can help at least, and that you're figuring things out on your end. But let me know if you are having challenges that I might be able to assist with. For those who are here, it's going to be another minute or so. No, 2 minutes, because it takes time for people to get in, but 2 minutes before we get people here. You're very welcome, Jennifer, and have a great day. Still waiting for a few more folks to get here, and then we'll start. Okay, I believe we should be all here. Yep, great. Okay, so please share your thoughts and your experiences with this discussion. Again, where can you use this technique of defining your future most effectively for yourself, your team, or your organization, and which of these steps might be the most helpful for you? So I'm going to go to either chat about this or unmute yourself, whichever is easiest for you. come on. I know it's not quite lunchtime, but I know you should still have the energy to talk about this. Just had 15 minutes of discussion.
And I'll chime in. I guess I have a hard time with this one simply because this is kind of past where I'm at, and so I haven't really run into this yet. So I mean, I hate to punt on it, but I mean that's I don't want to speak for everyone in our group, but we kind of had a very similar consensus in our group, was that we either don't deal with this yet or we don't deal with it anymore. As far as like this part of the process. So that I don't know, maybe that gives you a little bit of insight as to why the majority of us are remaining mute on this topic at this point. So I don't know if there's guidance you may have to give us on that, as far as that. I don't know, that's what we found in our group, but I'll leave it there.
No, I mean, the different techniques are applicable to different folks at different levels of organization, but what I would encourage you to be thinking about, so one of the reasons I was encouraging you to be thinking about your own career. This is a really useful technique to think about in your own career. You can always apply it to your career. As you think about your career development plan, and everyone, of course, of you, I really hope, has a clear career development plan that you're using to guide yourself into the future. This is a really good approach to use on your own career development plan. So how do you defend your future to your career, protect yourself from problems, seize opportunities, and so on. You know, you're not going to gather the stakeholders, but still all of the other things: anticipated future, anticipated problems, opportunities, dangerous judgment errors, unknowns. Those are all applicable to your career. Okay, so if nobody else has anything to chime in, let's go and do the polling. So please go ahead, take a look at the poll. Okay, so we have about 2/3 of the people voting. 67%, 9 out of 13. Let's get a couple more. Give 5 more seconds for people to vote. Okay, so this seems like this was, I have a thunder, so you might be hearing thunder around me, having a thunderstorm just appearing. So if my power cuts out, that's why. So moderately helpful for most of you, 90%, and then just over 10% would find it very helpful. That's good to know. So this sounds like this technique would be less applicable to most of you, partially because of the career stage you're currently in right now. Okay, great. So this is a good time for a 10-minute break. It's 11:49 right now, so please come back at noon and we'll do the last closeout portion. All right, 10 minutes. Start in about a minute. All right, it's time to start. So the first thing that I want to note is that I just sent you during the break some follow-up resources. So they should be in your email now. And if you're around, you can check your email. You should be getting them from gleb@disasteravoidanceexperts.com. If you need to check your spam to make sure it's not in spam, and if it is in spam, pull it out and make sure to mark my address as a safe address. And even if it's not in spam, mark my address as a safe address so that we can exchange emails and communicate that way. Okay, so that's the first step. So you should be getting, from Donna, you should be getting a physical copy of my book. And from me, you should be getting the assessment, digital copies of the assessment and dangerous judgment errors in the workplace, the poster on the 5 questions to avoid decision disasters, the manual on failure proofing, the manual on defend your future, and the manual on making the best decisions. So all of those should be in your inbox in the form of an email with Dropbox links. And they'll be in whatever email you use to register for Zoom. So FYI. If you don't have it, check your spam, let me know, fix this. All right, let's go on. So the last thing I want to go to is strategic integration of these techniques into your organization. You want to make sure to be able to integrate these, at least into your own work, but ideally into your team, into your organization as a whole. Defend your future is a great initial technique. There's immediate value in looking at alternative futures, but it sounds like that's not so applicable for most of you. So then what I would do is use the assessment and dangerous judgment errors. That's an easy one to get into and get people awareness of and get them into the process of how do you integrate these techniques and how do you think about them. And then using the 5 questions for quick decision making, that is a very effective and quick technique that's very low effort, very easy to integrate, just takes a couple of minutes to do once you actually take this, once you learn how to do it. And it's really super helpful, and people get the most benefit from using this technique a lot, but from what I've heard. And they get, for major decisions, of course, and for projects, they use the major projects, they use the other technique, but this is the one that they use most frequently on this daily level, and it's very easy to integrate into their organizations. So I want to, right now, to get you all into breakout rooms just for 5 minutes to talk about how you can, okay, Martin emailed, messaged me. Can you confirm one email with 6 links? Yes, that's going to be one email with 6 links, Martin. Yep. So that's what you should be having in your inbox. So we'll just break out into breakout groups for 5 minutes or so to discuss how you can integrate these into your organization, and then we'll gather for a broader discussion. So 5 minutes for this discussion, how you can integrate these techniques into your organization, and going into breakout rooms now. Maria, Brian, Fridolin, let me know if you're having difficulties getting into a breakout room. Sean, Alex, what are you talking about in the room?
We had just kind of discussed a little bit, but my wife was home, so I said, "Give me a second," and
Okay.
stepped away.
Oh, no, never mind. Yeah, so then continue, then discuss whatever you were going to discuss. Yeah, I'm popping into and out of rooms, so please go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We started, like I said, I think it's a very good topic, and but then, like I said, my wife just needed something from me, so I said I'll bow out for a second. So, yep.
I think this would be best used for planning audits and working with the business unit that we're working with in order to help get their understanding of what could be going wrong and then what we need to look at, and then designing and effectively making a plan from there. So I think that's what I can take out of what I've seen and understood from this.
Great. How do you think you can integrate most effectively these techniques into your organization?
Most likely, like what I related to the most was assessing, like your example was hiring a new employee. My example with that was right now during COVID, we've got associates at branches that aren't being visited. So protecting our cash assets And that's one thing that I'll definitely be taking away from this is almost making a risk matrix and inputting the riskier branches based off of cash levels, seniority at the branch, different items that could cause a branch to be more risky, and developing an action plan on how to help prevent any internal theft at those locations. So that's something that I'll definitely be using because that's a big topic of discussion at the bank right now is how are we ensuring that internal theft isn't happening? So using that more of as a risk matrix.
Yeah, and you can use that, the attribution evaluation. So that's a very good tool to use for a risk matrix. Look at various attributes, look at various options and various criteria and weigh them. So weighted attribution to various risk options. That's going to be, I think, a good approach for you.
Yeah, and we already implement something similar to that, but I think this is more of a good visual that we could document and have, and especially presenting it to executives and leaders in the bank. I think that would also demonstrate how we've actually looked at it rather than this is what we've determined is the riskier location. So yeah, definitely something that I'd like to use in the future.
Excellent, thank you. Great,
Yeah.
that sounds like a clear and pragmatic step. And of course, the manuals are going to help you with that as well as the book. Sean, what about you if you are free right now?
Oh, so we're also right in the middle of so I'm in a governance area, and I see a lot of actual use in this and I plan on providing a lot of this information to our PM group, who's actually going to be writing out the new COVID processes that I'm currently implementing around this specific topic. So, you know, there is a lot of in the COVID framework, a lot of dialogue around making sure that you account for all the stakeholders, that you make sure you account for all the unknowns, that you evaluate what the risks is of success and failure throughout the whole process. You do a post-implementation review to look at what all the successes and failures were throughout the whole thing. So a lot of this information I had actually planned on sitting down and visiting with the PM group, and specifically the PM, the director of PM, and sharing this information and to look into how we might be able to incorporate some of this into their processes as we write out the individual activities. So
excellent. I'm glad to hear that.
It's all very, yeah.
Excellent. So it sounds like probably the making the best decisions technique and the failure proofing techniques are going to be the really important ones for you, where you can take elements from those and incorporate them into your processes.
Yes.
Okay, great, perfect.
Yep. And in the COVID framework, there's other areas as well, specifically up in the management area, where you're trying to align with corporate goals. So we will be working with the corporate governance as well. Again, I plan on sharing this in those conversations, bringing in some of these techniques. Ultimately, it very much aligns with what we already currently do. It's you know, it's brought in a few new kind of perspectives, some things to consider. So yeah, no, it's I can see a lot of use in this. So
excellent. And then it's good that it already ties into what you're doing, so that makes it more pragmatic, relevant, and easy for you to integrate. And the manuals will of course be helpful.
absolutely.
Okay, great. Let me pop into another room, and I'll be closing out the room. So you have still 60 seconds to talk about stuff. Maybe about another 40 seconds before everyone else gets here. So we're waiting for folks to pop in. Okay, I believe we're all here. Great. So I'd like to hear about your discussion about how you can effectively integrate these techniques and what you can take away, bring to your workplace, bring to your career, bring to your activities. Alpana?
Yeah, I just of the 2 days, what a lot of things I learned. I think a lot of times we do make them instant, kind of, based on your experience, knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
decisions versus looking at this, fact-based or following any techniques. So
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of information, questions, whatever, that I learned over 2 days would be very helpful in most of my projects.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Okay, thank you very much. It sounds like the information, the questions would be helpful. Great. Thank you. All right. Other folks. Alex, would you be willing to share about what you talked about, the risk matrix?
So something that I took away from this is developing more of a visual risk matrix for our branches. Something that's of concern right now at the bank is protecting the cash at the different branches, and there's no one visiting the branches. So something that we're concerned about is internal theft. So to determine which branches could be the riskiest ones and to monitor more, we could include how much cash is at the branch, the seniority of the employees at the branch, including the volume and how busy the branch is. That way we can kind of get a good visualization of which branches do we need to monitor more closely, rather than ones that are probably less busy and less risky to monitor. And then going into 2021, that could help us out significantly on choosing which branches to definitely incorporate into our audit plan.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. And talking about the attribute analysis for making the best decisions, just for other folks to have that visual. Okay, thank you, Alex. Appreciate it. And Brian, you're also in our group talking about using some of the techniques from making the best decisions and from failure proofing. Would you be willing to share about that?
Is there two Brians, or are you asking me? Or is there two Brians, or are you asking me?
I think he was talking about me.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Okay,
Chandra.
sorry.
I think I was sorry, Brian. I apologize about that, and I apologize, Sean.
That's okay.
I was confused about the people who are there.
That's okay. So I work in the IT governance area, and we're currently in the process of rolling out COBIT framework for our IT processes and activities. And there is a large number of the management activities that would benefit greatly reviewing this information and looking at how they can integrate it with what they're currently doing. I mean, we're fairly in a line already, but I could see a few of these areas where it may challenge their current process and maybe enhance it and provide some benefit to what they're currently doing. So I plan on bringing this to the PM group as well as the senior management group and sharing this with them so that they can look at it as we walk through those COBIT activities to determine how they're going to perform these different various reviews, looking at success factors, the unknowns, evaluating how they're approaching things, potential solutions and stuff like that. So there's a lot of benefit to this. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sean. I appreciate you sharing that. Great. So both the senior management and the PM would be found a lot of this useful. All right. Would anyone else like to share about anything that they discussed and anything that they're going to be taking away? All right, then. Well, this was what I wanted to share with you, and it sounds like at least a number of people, all of you found all the techniques either moderately or very helpful, which is great, and you'll be taking things away from the techniques, which is great. The email I sent you has a link where you can schedule time with me for a free coaching consulting session. I'll be happy to do that, to talk about integrating these techniques more deeply into your organization, however I might be helpful. And of course, you want to take a look at the manuals, the book, and the assessment. Then you'll have all of that and you'll be able to draw on that. All right. Thank you everyone for coming, and I hope this has been helpful. And everyone have a good day.